Hello, everybody. It's me, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob. It's Saturday. It's March 2nd. Spring is just around the corner. You're going to love this encounter sent in by an emailer, this true cryptid encounter. I liked this so much. I got it about 2 years ago, and it made my book, Bigfoot, Michigan Rob Presents True Cryptid Encounters, Book 1, found on Amazon. The link is in this video. For those of you that have bought it when Amazon comes calling, please leave a review. It does help promote sales. This is fantastic. You know, as I read through this, I've spoken about this once or twice on a live show, and I got some people commenting on, "Hey, Rob, can you give us the full story?" So you're getting a double dose here. For those of you that have not bought the book, this is a sample of what's in the book, and for those of you that bought the book, this is an audio for you. How does that sound for you? I like this. It's leave a comment. Let me know. I'm thinking this is Dogman all the way, you guys. And as this story unfolds, I think you might lean that way. Some sort of cryptid creature for sure. As Bart Nunnally would say, maybe it's an inhumanoid. I don't know. But it's a fantastic encounter. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob if not already. Thank you ever so much for that. I do appreciate it. And I'm going to get on with it. I'm excited for this one. Kick back, relax. And here we go. This story is about a husband and wife truck driving team, Becky and Josh. The story will revolve around Becky. Again, they are a truck driving team and would take turns driving 2 weeks on and off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, driving their rig. It was a rather hard schedule as the husband and wife would never see each other except for brief periods in the morning when the other part of this work tandem would be off on the road almost as soon as they saw each other, always leaving each other home alone for the weekends, and more specifically for those 2 weeks. Almost on schedule, it seemed that every time that Becky was home alone, strange sounds and howls from the property would always stir up, causing anxiety for Becky. In the brief moments that the two had talked, mostly by cell phone, Becky had urged Josh that the two needed to make changes, as she literally would never be able to enjoy any time while left alone, while Josh was on the road. Josh had agreed and always assured Becky that nothing was wrong and that he would see about looking into a different trucking line. Or perhaps more realistically, just find a new way to earn a living. The property that they lived on was 2.5 acres in the woods of western Alabama. They had a rather large single-level house with a beautifully wrapped around porch that covered every area of the woodline with a breathtaking view. This porch was what the couple enjoyed the most. The house sat squarely in the middle of the acreage. Off the back end of the home, the tree line was 200 yards away, and the same went for the front side of the home that led to the interstate. On both sides of the home, the wood line was roughly 20 yards from either side. The very strange things that Becky would always experience on her days alone always came from the back of the house. Strange howls, an unfamiliar animal, almost wolf-like, although Becky did not know of any wolves in this part of Alabama, or if any in Alabama. The sounds of lumbering, the sounds of snapping of large trees falling to the ground always kept Becky up late at night. There was no logging industry on her land, with the property being private. The surrounding state-owned lands and other private properties had no logging contractors in the area for hundreds of miles away. Then, what drove Becky far more terrified was the sounds of very heavy footfall walking outside her home, and she had even heard it on the roof of her house. The footfall was strange, as it always starts at some sort of animal on four legs, or at least she thought it was an animal, but after a few moments, it almost assuredly sounded like it was bipedal, or even like a very big person mulling around the house that ended up leading to the rooftop. Then, finally, after another night of footfall and a presence being felt up on her roof, Becky called the state police. The patrolman pulled up to Becky's home, and she told the officer about hearing footsteps or somebody walking outside of the house, which then proceeded to the top of the roof. Becky also went on to tell the trooper about all the strange howls, animal-like, wolf-like, undiscernible, the falling of timber, and the repeated footfall and walking on her roof that continues almost on a daily basis. The officer asked why this was the first time calling the state police, and she told the officer that perhaps it was her imagination, and mentioned when Josh got back that they would investigate this together. So this has been going on for some time, you guys, and yeah, I mean, it's kind of a good question by the officer, not to, why is this like the first time, if this is happening so often, just one call in. I don't care if they're going to investigate together. I'd have made that call too, I believe. The officer took all the notes from Becky and started his walk about the property. After spending an hour or so, the officer came back to give Becky his findings. The officer went on to tell Becky that he did not find anything that warranted her to be alarmed as he looked her along the perimeter of the home and found no tracks, footprints, or anything suspicious. The trooper did take note of all the strange happenings and said that he would file his report and perhaps have a squad car patrol her property for the next week to assure or to help relieve her nerves or her fears. The officer said that he would also stay in the area until the end of his shift, which ended around 6 in the morning, to give her some sense of relief. Early the next morning, around 10 o'clock, a knocking at Becky's door startled her, as a different trooper from the night before was standing at her porch. The trooper introduced himself as Dan and asked Becky if she had a moment to speak with him. She obliged him and welcomed him in her home, and the two sat in the kitchen and offered Trooper Dan a fresh cup of coffee. Becky had asked as to why the visit and questioned if there was something that perhaps was missed from the night before. Trooper Dan said there were no new developments, but did have questions regarding the report from the night before. The trooper went over the strange howls or the wolf-like sounds, the heavy footfall, falling of timber or tree snaps, with the speculation of something also walking upon her roof. About 10 minutes of talking back and forth, Dan abruptly stopped and told Becky that when he was off of duty, he moonlighted as a quote-unquote Bigfoot cryptid investigator and found her claims to be very similar to some of his other past investigations. Becky, taken somewhat by surprise, exclaimed, "You think what? Bigfoot? What's a cryptid?" The trooper nodded yes and went on to tell Becky of his research and asked her not to think he was making up a story or making fun of her or kidding her, that he was absolutely serious. He was so serious enough, in fact, that he asked Becky if he could come back later in the evening and camp on her property for the weekend. Becky's mind was whirling and thought that this person was perhaps someone that was pulling a joke or wanted to get something over on her. She thought to herself, who makes up such things? Trooper Dan realized by the look on Becky's face, knew that she was a bit apprehensive and frankly a little bit scared. Again, if you're unfamiliar with this, everybody, I think this would be kind of strange myself, somebody offering while your husband's gone to spend the night or camp out on your property. I don't blame this woman being by herself in the middle of the woods for being apprehensive, of course. Dan then assured her that he was serious and even put Becky in touch with his trooper's station on his radio to talk to his captain and talk about Dan's side job as an investigator. After several minutes talking to Dan's captain, she whimsically agreed to Trooper Dan's seemingly absurd proposal. Dan thanked her and said that he would be back later in the day around 5 p.m. to set up his base camp. Not a minute past the hour of 5 p.m., Trooper Dan arrived at Becky's home. He came fully prepared. A one-man tent, night vision, and FLIR heating sensing instrumentation, a sleeping bag, wood for fire, the usual accessories used for any weekend camping trip. Dan proceeded to set up his base camp 100 yards from the back of the house with the same proximity to the woodline. Dan even brought a set of two-way transmitters so the two of them could communicate from base camp to the house to keep Becky informed on the night's events. Prior to leaving for base camp, Dan, being well prepared, had told Becky of his plans for the night. He had brought some 3-inch in diameter wood sticks that reminded Becky of a baseball bat to use to simulate possible reported or related wood knocks, something that was always accompanied with a possible Bigfoot. He also said that during the night that he would make a series of howls or like Bigfoot whoops to try and draw attention. Of course, Becky is amazed, and she just listens to Dan. Dan said that two-way radios would be used to keep Becky abreast of his every move and not to startle her. Becky, now thinking aloud, expressed her concern, as this sounded all too strange. Dan, kind of laughing back but understandingly, said, "What we are possibly dealing with is indeed very strange and unfamiliar with most people." So Dan is trying to befriend her, trying to make her calm. Dan thinks something's going on, right? Becky shrugged and almost apologetically thanked Dan for his help. She, in fact, was kind of comforted in the fact that a man would not be too far away and reluctantly had hoped that her nightly activity would commence, just to relieve her of the fact that she was not going crazy. Dan, now settled into base camp with the sun just starting to set, radio Becky that he would be starting a series of wood knocks, 3 at a time, for every 20 minutes for the next hour. Becky, now informed, wished Dan luck, and just as the sun began to fall, Trooper Dan made his first tree knocks. The wooded area was ablaze with the sounds of crickets and other small insects and rodents, bustling about. The faint chirping of birds you could also hear in the background. Upon completing the knocks, nothing changed. He could hear the sounds from the forest, but no such response to the knocks. 20 minutes passed, and Dan again smacked out his knock for the second time. Nothing back except the sounds of nature. The third time, Dan again commences his knock. This time, something was different. The sounds of the forest stopped. No clattering of chipmunks or rodents. The sounds of the crickets suddenly stopped as well. Dan had an eerie sensation take over him. The forest kept silent for the next several hours, and it was approaching midnight. Dan radioed into Becky and said that he now would be doing a series of howls, or, as he explained, whoops, allegedly performed by Bigfoot. He assured her to stay calm. In the quiet of the night, Dan let out the calls. He did this twice in the next hour or so and had no response. It was getting close now to 2 a.m, and Dan radioed Becky that he would do one more set of howls or calls, and then he would call it a night. He said that he would start up later in the morning around 9 a.m. to venture out into the woods to do some investigations. Becky thanked him and wished Trooper Dan good night. Dan made his last set of calls, put out his fire, and prepared to turn in. Just before getting ready for bed, it happened. A return howl, much like a wolf, roared back. This howl, however, did not come from his direction, but it came directly from Becky's house. Almost as immediately as the howl bellowed out, Becky was on the radio asking Dan why he made the sound so close to the house. Dan frantically told Becky to stay put as he quickly started his way back to Becky's house. Almost 50 yards away, Dan stopped and saw a large figure on the roof of Becky's house. Now Becky starts back on the radio and exclaimed, "It's on the roof." Not quite able to see what this was exactly on the roof, Dan pulled out his night vision binoculars. He looked out. He looks out towards the roof when he sees a big beast of some sort that he can't make out. He knows it's big. It's standing upright on 2 legs. He cannot make it out. This creature's going from back and forth on the roof. Dan continued to follow the beast's movement from side to side when it leaped off the roof and started to run towards the wood line. Dan, still focused on this creature, now sees it drop bipedally onto all fours and disappear into the woods. After reaching the house, Becky was already screaming, "Did you see it? Did you see it?" Dan said yes. He saw something that he claims to be neither man nor beast, a combination, but he wasn't quite sure if it was a Bigfoot or a Dogman. It was something out of this world, he proclaimed. The two of them raced to the side of the house where the creature jumped off, and to their dismay, not a single track was found. As far as Becky and Josh, they still live at their home and forged a relationship with Dan, Trooper Dan, that is. To this day, no further encounters have occurred. In fact, it has become quite peaceful. Still, with their new friend Dan, they continue to investigate what type of phenomena, what type of creature was this that paid a visit that night in Alabama and the prior nights. Pretty cool story. I find it fascinating, though, that this couple, it was always when the woman was left alone, Becky, where this creature would walk on the roof, walk around her property. I also feel that it's kind of strange, or odd anyway, I should say, is the appropriate word, how after she befriended Trooper Dan, and how Trooper Dan, they had this encounter. He saw this creature on the roof jump off into the tree line and vanish. I find it odd that not a single track was laid, although he sees it run. Did it run into a portal? Was this an ethereal creature? Certainly had weight, as she could hear it on the roof. It was something, you guys. And the fact that it has not returned to the property is also intriguing. Maybe this creature got the satisfaction out of knowing that now it was recognized, and maybe had it not been recognized, it would continue to come to the property. I don't know. What do you think about that? I find it odd. I do find it odd that after Dan finding this and seeing this, that it did not return. I think it's cool that they've become friends and they continue to investigate. I thought that was a great story, and I wish them the best. I thank you all for listening and tuning on in. Thanks for subscribing to Bigfoot Michigan Rob on YouTube. Thanks for buying my book. Don't forget, Tuesday nights, 9 o'clock, Thursday afternoons at 1 are my live shows, and on the weekends I do put out these true cryptid encounter stories from my subscribers or from encounters from emailers that I do get in. Love each and every single one of you. Leave a thumbs up, leave a thumbs down, leave a comment. Thank you. Have a great weekend. BMR. Until next time, I'm out.